everybody, I'm Peter Laws and welcome back to the second in a three-part episode of the Flicks the Church Forgot, where I'm exploring three very different expressions of on-screen violence, as seen in a crop of new Blu-ray releases from Arrow Video. Now remember, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Rev Peter Laws, or check out the archive of audio shows when this used to be just a humble podcast at SoundCloud or iTunes. Search for the Flicks the Church Forgot to find that, or read my books and magazine columns in all good bookshops now. In the last episode, I reviewed the 1987 slasher movie Doom Asylum, which presents violence as absurd, ridiculous, over-the-top and slapstick. That's one way of presenting death on the screen, but other expressions, well, they are available too. And in this episode, I want to offer you a more classy way of killing people. In fiction, you do understand that. I'm talking about in fictional movies. Yes, good. Right, anyway. We see some classy ways of killing people in the case of the Scorpion's Tail from 1971, which is just about to come out in a new Blu-ray release from Arrow. Now, most of you will know this already, but just in case you don't, there is a subgenre in horror which is slightly unusual because in terms of its plots and themes, it really would sit more comfortably or more accurately in the crime fiction or thriller section. However, they contain such graphic and intense murders that they have ended up finding a home within the horror stable too. And I'm talking, of course, about the giallo genre. Giallo is the Italian word for yellow, which was the color of many of the early crime fiction paperbacks that you could get in Italy. Here's an example now. Here's an example of a giallo paperback that I've got from 1973, which I picked up from Luigi Cozzi when I met him in Rome last year. He's the director of films like Contamination and Star Crash, and he also works at Profondo Rosso, the horror shop and museum owned by the great giallo director Dario Argento. And it was great to meet Luigi, and he even signed this giallo novel for me, even though he didn't write it, which is pretty cool. But anyway, as you can see, the color of this paperback is yellow, or rather giallo, and the plural of which is gialli, by the way. And it's used as a common way of describing these kind of horror crime movies. And these films have very particular and recognizable patterns to them. And funnily enough, the crime fiction novels that I write are directly inspired and reminiscent of giallo movies. So it's not a shock to see that you can find people who, well, my novels are in the crime fiction section of the bookshop, but many people read it and say they feel like a horror. That's because they're kind of like giallos. So anyway, giallo is usually a murder mystery that often feature an amateur sleuth rather than detectives or police. Again, my novels feature amateur sleuths. And the plots can be quite convoluted and twisty in giallo. The titles are often dramatic and rather cryptic, and the music in giallo movies are very funky. The murderers, and this is key for our discussion, the murders, though, are very stylized. One almost might say glamorous or artistically or stylishly portrayed. Now, Arrow Video are about to release their restored version of La Coda dello Scorpione, the case of the Scorpion's Tail from 1971, which comes from the director Sergio Martino. Now, he's also made giallis like Torso and The Suspicious Death of a Minor. That's minor with an O-R, by the way, not with an E-R. That's My Bloody Valentine, different film. But the film starts with a woman called Lisa, who's having an adulterous affair with a man in London, while her husband, a businessman, is traveling for work elsewhere. As the couple canoodle in bed, we get intercut shots of the husband's aeroplane in what has to be one of the most, crappy and cruddy special effects ever. It's just a kind of toy plane hanging up there. And anyway, as the wife enjoys the company of her lover, we see the plane, or at least the toy plane, explode into flames. Oh no, her husband's plane has blown up in real life. But there's good news. She soon discovers that she is the now sole heir to his fortune of $1 million. Though the lawyer reading the will helpfully points out that this is £400,000 sterling in British money. Anyway, this inheritance money opens up the twisty-turny plot in which all sorts of people will stop at nothing to get their hands on the cash. Now, what's very interesting about the case of the Scorpion's Tail is the timing of it. Arrow Video make the point in saying that after World War II, Europe began to rebuild itself again, and actually the economy across Europe started to do rather well. And with developments in technology as well as more disposable income, we saw a real big boom in European travel. Enter the glamorous world of the ordinary, everyday person, being able to hop on a plane for a holiday or a package holiday and experience the jet-set lifestyle. People were starting to holiday and do business in other countries across Europe. It was like the glamorous locales were suddenly on everybody's doorstep, so to speak. And of course, this had a knock-on effect for filmmakers and producers. Now, films could be easily set in multiple exotic locations, and that's what we see very vividly in the case of The Scorpion's Tail. It starts in London, but then we see the various beautiful locales of Athens, and then we're getting gorgeous sights of the coastline of Greece. And so while Doom Asylum, in the last episode that I talked about, Doom Asylum, due to its budget, that was relentlessly set in one location, the case of The Scorpion's Tail really feels more like a Bond movie in how it hops around Europe in all these exotic locales, which is great. It's always nice to see. So anyway, this £1 million inheritance starts leading to murder, and these murders are presented in typical giallo fashion. Yes, you guessed it, the killer wears leather gloves and wears a mask. At one point, he or she even steps out of the shadows in what looks like a kind of kinky full leather outfit. I don't know what that was about. But anyway, this killer kills in typically graphic and intense ways for these types of films. And that is the irony of giallo films. The Italians fill the screen with style and beauty. The women are gorgeous in these films. The men are rugged and handsome. George Hilton in this film is just so cool-looking. He's like an everyday insurance salesman who gets sucked into this investigation, but he just oozes coolness and handsome, and he's so suave-looking. So what I'm saying is the people, the locations, the fashions, the architecture of giallo movies are beautiful to look at. And often the set designers and the lighting technicians, and most of all the directors of photography, have made absolutely sure that that's what you feel. You look at these things and go, wow, I could hang pictures of this on my wall. They're so pretty. And yet they get punctuated with moments of really quite extreme violence. The director Martino will happily show throats being slit or blood, fairly bright red blood getting sprayed across glass, or when, this really made me wince, there's a scene where a shard of glass is brutally stabbed directly into a person's eyeball. It's like, ugh, right? And so we find that in amongst the beautiful surroundings of giallo films, we get these vicious scenes of violence. But even in the violence, the Italians can't help but being stylish. There's something shocking about the deaths, absolutely, in giallo films, but they're done in such a way that they don't feel fully real. So therefore, they don't offend our sensibilities in quite the same way as, let's say, Last House on the Left, which we're going to look at in the next episode. I would say some commentators describe the violence of a giallo movie as being beautiful in and of itself. Now people would get worried about that and think, wow, these folks are psychopaths for saying such a thing. But I think you need to calm down. These guys don't say screen violence is beautiful because they like real life stuff, but rather they recognize that's precisely what this book's about, by the way. But precisely, there's artistry and craftsmanship that go into these murders that end up creating a kind of unreality about them. Violence in a giallo movie is shocking, but you tend to feel it's part of a strange, dreamlike nightmare world, or some sort of grotesque opera or a ballet. Now, I suppose one of the clearest examples of what you could call beautiful artistic violence in the giallo for me would be in one of my favorites, which is Tenebrae from Dario Argento from the 80s. Now, the actress Veronica Lario became famous for being the second wife of Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, the notorious Berlusconi. And she also crops up in Tenebrae, where she gets her arm chopped off, and the blood just fountains up a white wall. It is a horribly graphic scene in one sense, but it is so over the top and ridiculous, and also feels orchestrated or choreographed, that it's like the contrasting color of the white of the walls and the white of her dress against this Mount Vesuvius of blood and everything. It creates a form of violence that is shown through the lens of, well, the artist, not to sound too pedantic about it, the creator. Because the blood splash, what is left, really does look like something an artist could create. There's an unreality to it, therefore, which makes it both shocking and yet safe-ish to watch. You get the sense that with the case of the Scorpion's Tail too, these deaths in the film are pretty brutal at times, but they are served to you within a sandwich of beautiful sights which both accentuate the shock of them the violent moments, but also when the film is done, you kind of file them all away in the same way. There are all these shocking moments are filed into a framework of style and classiness, which is really an interesting approach to presenting on-screen death. This is nothing like Doom Asylum that makes death and suffering appear funny or slapstick. It's got similarities, but it's different. Yet it's nothing like the violence we're about to see in Last House on the Left either, which is a completely different approach entirely. In one of the extras, by the way, in Case of the Scorpion's Tail, one of the commentators describes Martino, the director, as a kind of chameleon who never puts his own stamp on films, but rather obeys the rules of the genre he's working in. And certainly when he did a giallo movie, he makes a perfectly fine giallo movie. But this guy was saying he's not like an auteur. He doesn't put his recognizable stamp in the same way as if you watch a Dario Argento movie. You can often have recognizable moments, like he has elaborate set pieces, for example. But anyway, I thought that was quite an interesting observation about Martino. Now, I expect that this film and various other vintage giallo movies might actually not be to everybody's taste. And by that I mean I think some horror fans who prefer Friday the 13th or Saw or Nightmare on Elm Street type of films might find that these giallos are rather tedious or even confusing. I've got to admit, right, the plots to giallos are not always easy to follow, and they're not the sort of film you can check your phone during. You know, if you look down and check something on your phone midway through a giallo, you can look back up and think, I haven't got a clue what's going on anymore, because they're quite convoluted. So you need to give them your attention, like this one. But if you're patient, I do think that films like The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, give it a go, and you might find yourself, having a really interesting, clever, twist-filled plot wrapped up in a gorgeous vintage package, and giallos can be really fascinating films. Now, Arrow have released The Case of the Scorpion's Tail in a new 2K restoration, which is directly from the original negative, and it looks great. You get the usual option to watch with the original subtitles, or you can prefer the dubbing. I think the purists that watch it are going to watch it in the original language, and I pretty much always would watch a foreign language film with subtitles rather than dubbing. But call me evil, but I rather enjoying watching the dubbed versions of old Italian horror movies. I think I just grew up on hearing these same English and American voices in so many different VHS versions where you couldn't change put subtitles on, and I just got a kick out of those things. So I really wonder if anyone's out there does the same, if they enjoy watching the dubbed versions rather than the subtitle. And Arrow once again provide a bunch of informative, interesting extras on here, which they're great. They're just digging in deep into the film with the people who actually were part of the film itself. The first pressing, by the way, of The Case of the Scorpion Tail comes with an illustrated colour booklet, which has some writing by Rachel Nesbitt. I follow Rachel on Twitter, and she's a real guru when it comes to giallo cinema, so it's always worth seeing what she says. So there you have it. 2 flavors of violence so far. With Doom Asylum, we had the lingering focus on death for comedic and shock value. With The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, we got stylized, almost classy violence that shocks, but may not necessarily leave us in any sort of great distress. But now, we need to look at another form of violence entirely, and to do that, we turn to Wes Craven's directorial debut. Join me in the third and final episode of these 3 flavors of violence, where I explore the grim reality of Arrow Video's new release of The Last House on the Left. But until then, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Rev Peter Laws. Find me on Facebook at Peter Laws, or my website, peterlaws.co.uk. And don't forget to check out my macabre novels and my most recent non-fiction book, exploring why humans love this stuff, why we love the morbid, the frighteners. All those books are out now in the different formats that you might want. So, listen, thanks for listening. And until next time, don't forget the flicks the church forgot.